The safe was wide open. Stacks of $100 bills spilled out like the pages of an untold story. More money than most people would ever see in their lifetime. From his leather armchair, Thomas Avery remained perfectly still. Eyes half-lidded, breathing measured, he feigned sleep. But every sense in his body was alert. Watching. Waiting. It was a test. Not of numbers or systems, but of character. After nearly 4 decades building one of the most powerful tech empires in the country, Thomas no longer trusted anyone. Not his board, not his shareholders, not even the executives who toasted him in public and schemed against him in private. The final blow came months earlier, when his longtime business partner had siphoned off millions from a joint venture, vanishing without a trace. Since then, Thomas had one question he couldn't shake. Was there anyone left in this world who was truly honest when no one was watching? Tonight, he planned to find out. The security system was off. The cameras were redirected. The vault door was deliberately left ajar. All that remained was for the right person to walk into the room and reveal who they really were. The office door creaked open. A janitor entered quietly, pushing a cart of cleaning supplies. Luana Jefferson, 34. Hard-working. Invisible to most of the company's elite. But Thomas had noticed her. For 2 years she had cleaned the executive floor like clockwork. No complaints, no missed days, no wasted time. And tonight, as usual, she wasn't alone. Holding tightly to her hand was her daughter, Isa. Just 7 years old, wearing small pink gloves and curious eyes that saw everything. Luana began wiping down shelves with practiced grace, unaware of the silent test unfolding around her. Isa drifted toward the desk. Her gaze landed on the open safe. She blinked, stunned. So much money. More than she had ever imagined existed outside of movies or cartoons. Her tiny feet edged closer. Thomas watched from beneath barely parted eyelids. His heart beat slower, heavy with anticipation. This is the moment, he thought. Every person has a price. Let's see hers. But Isa didn't take the money. She didn't pocket a single bill. She did something entirely unexpected. She started organizing it. She knelt by the safe, picking up crooked stacks with the precision of a tiny accountant. She separated the bills by denomination, res-tacked them evenly, and placed them back gently, meticulously, reverently, as if she were handling fragile heirlooms. Thomas held his breath. "Mommy," Isa whispered softly, "his money was all messy. I fixed it. Just like you taught me to do with our change jar at home." Luana turned in alarm, cloth still in hand. "Isa, you can't touch Mr. Avery's things." "But it was messy," Isa said, looking confused. "He'll be happy when he sees it neat." Thomas felt something tighten in his throat. Not anger. Not suspicion. Something else. Something he hadn't felt in years. Emotion. This little girl, who likely never had more than $20 in her hands, had organized a small fortune instead of stealing a cent. And more than that, she confessed it, innocently, without fear, without shame. There was no performance. No greed. Just a quiet, instinctive decency that didn't ask for praise. And Thomas knew, in that moment, that everything he believed about people might need to be re-examined. Because what he had witnessed wasn't just honesty. It was integrity in its purest form. What he didn't know was that this small act of goodness, from the daughter of a janitor, would trigger a series of events that would shake the foundations of his company, expose a rot he'd been blind to for years, and transform not just her life, but his. Forever. The office returned to silence after the shift ended. The girl was gone. Her mother, too. The safe was closed. The sticky note with Isa's innocent scrawl still sat on the edge of the desk, tilted just enough to catch the morning light that bled through the blinds. But Thomas Avery hadn't moved. Not for hours. He sat alone in the dark, the city glittering beyond the glass walls, the note between his fingers like a fragile artifact. He read it again. The money was messy. I fixed it. I hope that's okay. I.S.A. Not, I found it. Not, I wanted some. Just, I fixed it. He stood abruptly, pushing away the weight that had settled in his chest. That wasn't part of the plan. He had expected theft, hesitation, maybe even temptation. What he got instead was order, humility, care. She reminded him of someone. No, two someones. His wife, Evelyn, and their daughter, Emily. Both gone now. One to cancer, the other to distance. He hadn't spoken to Emily in 3 years. Thomas crossed the office and opened a drawer beneath his desk. Inside was a small, private screen wired directly into the building's shadow system. An unofficial surveillance grid only he and the security chief knew about. Cameras with no recorded history. No audit trail. No legal existence. He rewound the footage. Watched the moment again. There she was. ISA. Barely 7. Rearranging $20,000 with more care than most executives showed their expense reports. He watched her hands. Delicate, precise. She even aligned the corners of the bills, like she'd done this before, like it mattered. He leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. "Who are you?" he whispered. The next morning, Thomas called Karen, his longtime assistant. Efficient, discreet, unquestioning. "I need a file," he said. "On who?" "A janitor. Luana Jefferson. Works the night shift on the 45th floor. She has a daughter. 7. Quiet. Smart." Karen hesitated only a second. "I'll get you everything by noon." "Nothing goes through HR," Thomas added. "I want this off record." "Understood." He ended the call and turned toward the window, watching the clouds roll in from the Pacific. Outside, his company looked untouchable, all glass and chrome and clean reputation. But inside, he knew better. People whispered in corners. Numbers didn't always add up. And behind every forced smile was someone who'd sell out a stranger for a stock option. But ISA. She had rearranged a stack of cash because it was messy. She didn't know she was being watched. And yet, she acted as if someone good was always watching. That night, Thomas stayed late again. He turned off the lights. Left the door open just enough. Sat in his chair in the shadows, pretending to read. And waited. At 7:46 p.m. exactly, the cleaning crew clocked in. Same cart. Same gloves. Same little girl, holding her mother's hand like a lifeline. Luana was tired. He could see it in her shoulders. But she moved with quiet pride, like someone who refused to let exhaustion own her. Isa glanced at the desk as they passed. The safe was locked tonight, of course. But her eyes lingered, curious, not greedy. Thomas said nothing. He just watched. Behind the glass walls of a billion-dollar empire, the richest man in the building had begun studying a janitor's daughter. And what he was about to uncover in the days to come. About her, her mother, and the quiet war they fought every single day. Would change everything he thought he knew. Not just about them, but about himself. The file arrived at noon, just as promised. Karen slid it across the polished surface of Thomas's desk without a word. The folder was thin, too thin for someone who had worked in the building for 2 years. No complaints. No HR incidents. No red flags. No real record at all. Her name is Luana Jefferson, Karen said softly, almost as if she knew something sacred had been handed over. Single mother. No listed emergency contacts. She clocks in 5 minutes early. Every shift. Thomas didn't look up. And the girl, Isabel, goes by ISA. Bright. Quiet. No school issues. No relatives listed. She comes here on nights when Luana can't afford a sitter. Technically against protocol, but Karen hesitated. No one's ever complained. Thomas opened the file. Inside was a copy of Luana's application form, typed, neat, complete. Beneath that, a scanned note from payroll, explaining a temporary delay in benefits she never followed up on. He found a certificate of high school equivalency, dated over a decade ago. Then a single page, community college transcripts. She had been studying business. GPA, 3.9. Status, withdrawn due to financial hardship. That was it. No college degree. No family support. No elevator rides to the top. Just a woman cleaning offices she was once smart enough to run. Thomas closed the folder and tapped a finger on the desk, deep in thought. She's invisible, he murmured. Karen didn't answer. She didn't have to. In places like Avery Tech, people like Luana existed in silence. They weren't on the brochures. They weren't in the strategy meetings. They were ghosts in uniforms, cleaning up after the people who pretended they didn't exist. Until one of their children straightened $20,000 without blinking. That night, Thomas left his office early, but didn't go home. Instead, he walked the halls. Past departments and digital labs and investor lounges. Past the walls lined with awards engraved with his name. Past portraits of executives in suits, all white smiles and tailored ambition. He ended up at the observation deck on the 50th floor. From there, he watched the cleaning crew begin their shift below. Luana with her usual cart, ISA walking beside her, carrying a book nearly as big as her face. She sat cross-legged in the hallway outside the break room, reading silently while her mother polished brass door handles. She didn't look bored. She looked content. And Thomas felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Guilt. All these years of wealth and reach, and he had never really looked down. Never really asked who kept the building spotless, who swept the corners of the empire he built. Now, the janitor's daughter had shown him more integrity than half his boardroom. And that meant something. Maybe more than he was ready to admit. But not everyone was as interested in Luana's story. The next morning, during the Monday strategy meeting, Colson Drake, the company's CFO, leaned across the table and narrowed his eyes at a payroll spreadsheet displayed on the screen. "What's this new adjustment in janitorial compensation?" he asked. Thomas didn't flinch. Performance-based increase. "For a night janitor?" Colson scoffed. "That's generous." Thomas met his eyes. Cold. Flat. Controlled. "She earned it." Colson leaned back in his chair, clearly unconvinced. He wore his entitlement like a tailored suit. "Careful who you start handing out bonuses to, Thomas," he said with a thin smile. "You give them a little, they'll expect everything. It's just how people like that think." The room went quiet. Thomas smiled, one of those smiles that didn't reach the eyes. "People like what, Colson?" There was a pause. Just long enough to be uncomfortable. Colson raised his coffee cup, brushing it off. "Never mind." But the words had already landed. Thomas didn't say another word for the rest of the meeting. Later that evening, from behind the glass of his office, he watched Luana and Isa arrive once again. Same gloves, same cart, same routine. But now, he knew her name. He knew her story. He knew her strength. And he also knew something else. If someone like Coulson was paying attention to the payroll, then this was no longer just a quiet observation. This was the beginning of something bigger. Something that could no longer stay hidden. Something worth protecting. By Wednesday, the whispers had already started. Luana didn't hear them, not directly. But she noticed the shift. The subtle change in how some of the office staff looked at her when she walked past. How the elevator doors no longer held for her like they used to. How the friendly nods turned into tight, polite smiles. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She didn't know her raise had caught the attention of someone dangerous. She didn't know Coulson Drake had quietly requested access to payroll activity logs. And she didn't know that the moment her name crossed his screen, he saw not a person, but a threat to the structure he had always believed unshakable. A cleaning lady with a raise? Unacceptable. Thomas knew exactly what kind of man Coulson was. He had tolerated him for years, mostly out of corporate necessity. Coulson was born into money, the son of one of Avery Tekka's earliest investors, a walking artifact of inherited power. He was charming in boardrooms, brutal in private, and had never once in his life been told no by someone who mattered. Until now. Thomas had made up his mind. He wasn't just going to protect Luana and Isa. He was going to expose the culture that allowed men like Coulson to walk through fire without ever getting burned. But first, he needed evidence. He called in a favor. That night, at exactly 11 p.m., a black sedan pulled into the underground garage. A man stepped out wearing dark jeans, a baseball cap, and no badge. Marcus Chen. Former FBI. Private investigator. The kind of man who could disappear inside a boardroom or a boiler room and leave no trace. Still cleaning up corporate messes? Thomas asked, greeting him at the executive elevator. Only the juicy ones, Marcus said. What's the problem? Thomas didn't answer at first. He handed Marcus a tablet. The screen displayed security footage, Isa rearranging the money, Luana scolding her gently, the note on the desk. Marcus watched the entire clip in silence. Let me guess, he said. That kid just wrecked somebody's comfort zone. Exactly. And the sharks are circling. One of them already is, Thomas replied. I want everything. Emails. Phone calls. Off-the-record conversations. The works. Marcus nodded. You think he'll go after them? I think he already has. Meanwhile, Coulson wasn't waiting for permission. On Thursday, he approached the head of HR with a polite smile and a coffee in hand. A casual chat. A concerned tone. Just wanted to flag something, he said. There's a janitor, Luana Jefferson, who's been bringing her daughter into the building. I've seen the kid walking around the executive floor. It's a liability, don't you think? Sandra Miller, the HR director, frowned. She only sits outside the break room, quiet as a mouse. She doesn't go near equipment. Still, Coulson said, sipping his coffee. Not a great look. Could raise questions if something went missing. There it was. The suggestion. The seed. It didn't have to be true, only believable enough. He smiled, patted Sandra on the shoulder, and left her office as if he'd just helped save the company from disaster. That night, Luana noticed a note taped to her locker. Effective immediately, personal guests under 18 are not permitted in the building after business hours. There was no name, no signature, no explanation, just policy. She folded the paper quietly and placed it in her back pocket. Isa was sitting cross-legged on the floor, coloring with broken crayons and humming a tune her mother used to sing when things got hard. Luana didn't say a word. She just sat down beside her and rested her head against the wall. Upstairs, Thomas watched it all unfold in silence. He saw Luana read the note, saw her hide her disappointment, saw her protect her daughter's peace before her own dignity, and he felt something shift inside him. Anger, not explosive, but quiet and cold. The kind of anger that doesn't shout. The kind that builds plans. He called Marcus. "Whatever you were doing," he said, "double it." "I already did." Coulson Drake had no idea he was being watched. No idea that every email, every hallway conversation, every careless comment was being logged, time-stamped, and backed up. And he certainly had no idea that the girl he tried to push out of a hallway was about to turn the spotlight onto a world that had never been built to see her. The hallway was empty when Coulson stopped Luana. It was just after 9 p.m., and most of the building had gone quiet, except for the hum of the air vents and the low whine of the floor buffers echoing through the lower levels. Luana was returning from the supply closet when she saw him standing by the vending machine, holding a half-empty bottle of sparkling water like it was a wine glass. He didn't move aside. "Miss Jefferson," he said smoothly. "A quick word." Luana stiffened, but nodded. "Of course, sir." He smiled. But it wasn't kind. It was the smile of a man who thought he owned the ground you stood on. "I noticed you've been bringing your daughter into the building quite a bit lately. Charming little thing. Very bright." Luana said nothing. "But this isn't a daycare," he continued, his tone still soft, almost sweet. "And we have to think about the image of the company. The risk of distractions. Or accidents." Luana lifted her chin slightly. "She stays by my cart, sir. Quiet. Respectful. I wouldn't bring her if I had any other choice." "Of course," Coulson said. "I understand. You do what you have to." A pause. Too long. "But here's the thing," he added, stepping closer. "There are people in this company, important people, who think your presence here is becoming too visible, too comfortable." She felt it then, the threat under the velvet. "I'm just doing my job," she said, voice calm. "Then maybe do it a little more quietly." He leaned in. "And keep the girl at home." For a second, Luana's face faltered. Not in fear, but in pure, seething restraint. Isa was her child, her world. And this man, with his custom suits and cologne that cost more than her rent, had no right to speak her name with that tone. But she said nothing. Just turned, walked back toward her cart, and didn't look back. What Coulson didn't see was the camera above the vending machine, one that he had ordered installed 3 years ago to monitor low-tier employee behavior. He had forgotten it was there. Thomas hadn't. From his private terminal, he watched the entire exchange. The posture, the tone, the veiled insult, the quiet threat. And when it ended, he rewound it. Watched it again, and again, until the anger inside him stopped simmering and began solidifying. He picked up the phone. "Marcus." "Already saw it," Marcus replied. "You want to move?" "Not yet," Thomas said. "I want him to think he's winning." Over the next few days, Marcus and his team quietly began to assemble what they called the wall. Audio recordings of Coulson's private meetings with department heads. Internal emails referencing Luana in coded language. A flagged conversation with HR in which Coulson explicitly referred to her as a liability with a cleaning rag. A memo draft calling for stricter background checks on low-level employees with dependents. And then, gold. Marcus intercepted a private call Coulson made from his company line to a personal contact at a legal firm. "I need to build a case," Coulson said. "Something clean. Maybe performance-related. Maybe a breach of protocol. Doesn't have to hold in court, just needs to look real enough to justify termination." Thomas listened to the recording in silence, then stood from his desk. It was no longer a matter of if Coulson would cross the line. He already had. The question now was how to end it, and who would be watching when the curtain fell. That night, ISA didn't come to work. Luana said nothing about it, but Thomas noticed. Her cart moved slower. Her face looked drawn. She didn't hum like usual. The absence of the child's gentle presence made the office feel colder somehow, more like the way it used to be. Empty. Efficient. Dead inside. Thomas walked to the window, hands in his pockets, staring down at the city. A war had begun in his company. One that most would never see. But he had chosen his side. And this time, he wasn't going to fight it with silence or spreadsheets. He was going to burn down the system that let men like Coulson thrive. And he was going to do it using the same weapon they all feared most. Proof. Coulson Drake liked to think of himself as a strategist. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten outright. He didn't leave fingerprints. He simply adjusted the environment, just enough to make the people he didn't want there leave on their own. But Luana hadn't left. She kept showing up. Quiet. Polite. Professional. And worse, she was starting to earn attention. Some staff had even mentioned her positively in passing conversations. One executive assistant had referred to her as that woman with the little girl who always smiles. Coulson hated it. So he decided to do what he'd always done when soft power failed. He'd create a problem that only he could fix. The plan was simple. During Luana's shift, he'd plant an expensive item, something unmistakable, traceable, valuable, inside her cleaning cart. Then he'd make the discovery look coincidental. Security would be called. HR would be alerted. And just like that, Luana would go from invisible to terminated with cause. One signature. One lie. One less problem. He chose a $12,000 Rolex from his private collection. Unregistered. Easy to lose. Easy to claim. He slipped it into the storage bin of her cart while she was wiping down the lobby glass. Didn't even flinch. Didn't even look. He was a pro at this. What Coulson didn't know was that Thomas had already replaced the camera feed he thought was disabled. Marcus had installed 3 covert HD cameras 2 days earlier, disguised inside the fire alarm casing, an unused thermostat, and a corner molding near the janitor locker room. Everything was being recorded. From multiple angles. And that morning, Marcus had placed a GPS tracker inside the Rolex. At 9:22 p.m., Coulson approached Luana in the corridor near the East Wing conference rooms, clipboard in hand, face serious but calm. "Routine inspection," he said smoothly. "Nothing to worry about." Luana blinked, confused. "Sir, we've had reports of missing items. Just a precaution." He reached into her cart, unzipped the side bin, paused, just long enough for the cameras to catch the act. And then he pulled it out. The Rolex gleamed in his palm like a smoking gun. Well, he said. What do we have here? Luana froze. I've never seen that before, she said immediately, eyes wide. Of course not, Coulson replied, raising his voice slightly. Just enough for the two security guards now entering the hallway to hear. Things just magically appear in your cart now? One of the guards reached for his radio. Don't, said a voice behind them. Coulson turned. His expression faltered. Thomas Avery stood at the end of the hall, arms crossed, eyes like ice. Beside him, Marcus Chen. And behind them, three unfamiliar faces with press badges. Camera lights blinked on. Microphones raised. Coulson blinked. Thomas, Thomas walked slowly toward him. Do you know what this watch is, Coulson? It's mine. It was stolen. No. It's bait, Thomas said flatly. And you just took it. Marcus stepped forward, holding a tablet. He tapped play. On the screen, Coulson, casually dropping the Rolex into the janitor cart. 3 different angles. Time-stamped. Clear as daylight. You planted it, Marcus said. And we recorded you doing it. Every second. A second tap. Audio. Coulson's voice, in crisp quality, saying, doesn't have to hold in court. Just needs to look real enough. Another tap. The intercepted call. I need something clean. Maybe performance-related. Or a breach. The final clip. Coulson referring to Luana as a liability with a cleaning rag. Silence. Even the security guards took a step back. Thomas handed the Rolex to one of them. I suggest you detain him, he said calmly. I've already spoken with the police. They're on their way. So is our legal team. And the board. Coulson opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked at Luana, who hadn't moved. Isa was beside her now, holding her hand tightly, eyes wide and unblinking. Thomas turned to her. You don't have to be afraid anymore, he said softly. And for the first time in days, Luana let herself believe it. The arrest happened in the front lobby. Cameras rolled. Reporters shouted. Coulson Drake, CFO of Avery Tech, was handcuffed in a tailored suit and escorted out like a thief. Because he was one. The footage went viral before sunrise. And the story that followed, about a janitor, her daughter, and the billionaire who stood between them and injustice, would do something Coulson never imagined possible. It would change the culture of the entire company. The boardroom was packed. 12 people sat around the table, all in suits worth more than most people's monthly rent. Half of them had known Coulson since he was in prep school. A few had golfed with his father. One had been best man at his wedding. None of them had ever imagined seeing his face on national news. Cuffed, cornered, and caught red-handed. Now they sat in silence, watching the replay again. The Rolex. The planted evidence. The confession. Thomas had made sure there were no loopholes, no technicalities to hide behind. When the video ended, he turned off the screen and faced them. Let me be absolutely clear, he said, voice low, calm, and deliberate. This is not just about Coulson. This is about us. About the culture we let fester. Thomas, one board member began. He was acting alone. No, he wasn't. Thomas's voice cut through the room like a blade. He was acting within a system that has always assumed people like Luana don't matter. That they're disposable. That no one would ever stand up for them. He let that sink in. And that system ends today. The room shifted uncomfortably. Another board member, older and sharper than the rest, leaned forward. What are you proposing? Thomas straightened. An internal review. Every promotion. Every pay gap. Every HR complaint buried or ignored. I want it all reopened. You'll burn half the structure down. Then we rebuild it better. Outside that boardroom, the world had already started shifting. News outlets were calling the incident the Avery Tech Awakening. Employees across the country began sharing their own stories. Moments they'd felt unseen, unheard, unsafe. Some had faced racism. Others, sexism. Some were simply tired of being invisible. And at the center of it all was a little girl named Isa, who had quietly organized a stack of cash, and in doing so, had rearranged the priorities of a billion-dollar empire. 3 days after Coulson's arrest, Luana was called into Thomas's office. She came in quietly, still unsure of what to expect. Isa stayed outside, drawing in her notebook. She didn't like elevators anymore. Thomas stood to greet her. He wasn't wearing a suit today. Just a soft gray sweater and a look that felt more human than powerful. "Luana," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his. "Thank you for coming in." She sat, straight-backed, guarded. "I'm not here to offer an apology," he said. "Because what happened to you shouldn't have happened in the first place." She nodded once, silent. "But I am here to offer you something else." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside, a new contract, new title, new salary, new department. Director of Workplace Integrity. A department he had created the night after Coulson's arrest. Luana's eyes widened as she read the offer. "You want me to lead this?" "You already have," Thomas said. "You just didn't have the title." Her throat tightened. "I'm not qualified," she whispered. "You're the most qualified person I've met in 20 years. That afternoon, Isa ran through the executive hallway barefoot, holding a drawing in her hand. It was a picture of her, Luana, and Thomas, all smiling, standing on top of a building with a giant heart on the roof. "Mr. Thomas," she called. "I made this for you." He knelt to her level, took the drawing gently, and smiled, really smiled, for the first time in years. "Thank you," he said. "You've given me more than you'll ever know." By the end of the month, a Coulson Drake had been officially terminated, with a criminal investigation pending. The board of directors approved a full equity audit, led by external investigators. Thomas launched the Avery Foundation for Workplace Justice, starting with a $25 million seed. Luana took her place on the 46th floor, in an office with Isa's drawings framed behind her desk. And quietly, behind the scenes, Thomas had begun setting up something else. A long-term program that would fund scholarships, leadership training, and mentorships. For children of cleaning staff, security workers, cafeteria teams. The ones no one noticed. Because now, he noticed. And he would never stop noticing again. 6 months later, the halls of Avery Tech didn't sound the same. Laughter echoed more freely. Voices that had once stayed quiet during meetings now spoke with clarity. The janitors were no longer invisible. They had names, faces, stories. The building hadn't changed. But the sol dentro della, havia sido substituido. And it all began with a child who'd once said, "I just fixed the messy money." Luana Jefferson now walked through the 46th floor in quiet command. No uniform. No cart. Her badge now read, Director of Workplace Integrity. It still made her pause when she saw it. Still felt like someone else's title. But when she sat down at her desk, Isa's drawing of a giant heart in a frame behind her, She remembered that she had earned every inch of this space. Her first initiative had been simple: listening. She opened an anonymous reporting channel for employees of all departments. Within a month, she had uncovered wage disparities, unsafe conditions, and 3 toxic managers who quietly resigned before the investigation reports went public. Luana didn't call herself a leader, but people had started calling her that anyway. ISA, now 8, had become something of a mascot for the company. Though Thomas made sure she was never used for publicity. She attended the city's top private school under a full Avery Tech scholarship and spent most afternoons drawing in the company's new family room, built on the lower floor for employees with kids. When she wasn't drawing, she was asking questions. Why do some people get scared of other people just because they're different? Why did Mr. Coulson want to lie so bad? Why didn't anyone stop him before? Hard questions. Important ones. And every time she asked, Thomas Avery did his best to answer with honesty, even when the truth hurt. Coulson Drake had been officially charged with conspiracy, attempted fraud, and workplace discrimination. His family cut ties quietly. His father sold his shares back to the company at a loss, citing irreparable reputational damage. No firm would hire him. No friend would return his calls. He became a ghost, forgotten by the system that once protected him, just as he had tried to erase others. Thomas Avery didn't speak much to the press anymore. He didn't need to. People had seen what happened. And more importantly, they'd seen what he chose to do with his power. He stepped down as CEO 9 months after Coulson's arrest, passed the torch to a woman he had once nearly overlooked, Amira Caldwell, formerly head of people and culture, and now one of the first black female CEOs in tech at that scale. The headlines were brutal at first. Avery Tech goes woke. From empire to experiment. But then came the results. A record employee retention. A skyrocketing public trust. A Fortune 100 award for diversity in leadership. And then the headline Thomas cared about most. Company saved by janitor's daughter becomes model of corporate transformation. One afternoon, ISA stood beside Luana at an awards ceremony. The auditorium was full. Flashbulbs sparked. Luana had just finished her speech, hands still trembling, heart still pounding. As they stepped off stage, ISA whispered, "Mom, do you think Mr. Thomas was always a good guy?" Luana smiled. "I think he was always capable of being good. He just needed a reason to remember who he was." ISA nodded like that made perfect sense. Then she looked up, eyes shining. "I want to be someone's reason one day, too." Luana bent down, kissed her forehead. "You already are, baby." In the months that followed, the Avery Foundation expanded nationally. It funded education for custodial staff children, paid off student loans for low-income employees, sponsored startup incubators for young black women in tech. And in a quiet home on the east side of Oakland, Luana Jefferson paid off her mortgage. Then bought the empty house next door for her mother. ISA got a puppy. Named him Justice. Fitting. 10 years later, ISA stood at the podium of her high school graduation. 18 now. Tall. Bright-eyed. Radiating the quiet confidence of someone que cresu cercada de amor, e tambum de verdades duras. She wore a navy blue gown and a silver honor cord. Her speech had been selected as the closing of the ceremony. She cleared her throat, smiled at the sea of parents, teachers, and cameras, and began. "When I was 7, I followed my mom to work on a night she couldn't find a babysitter. We cleaned office floors, the quiet kind of job no one ever thanks you for. That night, I saw a pile of money. I didn't know it was a test. I just knew it was messy. So I fixed it." Laughter rippled gently through the crowd. That moment changed everything. Not because I'm special, but because someone powerful was finally paying attention to someone who usually goes unseen. That someone was my mom. She looked toward the front row. Luana wiped a tear silently. People say heroes wear capes. But I say heroes wear cleaning gloves. They raise daughters who question the rules. And sometimes, they teach billionaires how to be better men. A pause. She smiled. "I've been accepted to Harvard this fall. I'll be studying law, because I want to build systems that protect good people before they're forced to survive the bad ones." She closed her folder. The auditorium rose in applause. And somewhere, near the back of the room, Thomas Avery stood, cane in hand, heart full. He had aged. Slower now. Softer. Quieter. But every time he looked at ISA, he felt the pulse of something strong and righteous moving through the world. She had become a symbol, but more than Isso, Ella Havia se tornado uma liderança real. After the ceremony, she found him by the trees. He smiled. "You crushed it. You cried," she teased. "I didn't. You did." He shrugged, eyes glinting. "Maybe." They sat on a bench under the California sun, the same sun that had once shone through the windows of a glass-walled office, onto a leather chair, and onto a stack of money left out like bait. "Mr. Thomas," she asked suddenly, "did you know that day that I would pass the test?" He looked at her. "No," he said honestly. "I thought you would fail, because by that point, I thought everyone would." ISA nodded slowly. "Thank you for watching me anyway." Thomas reached for her hand, old, steady, scarred by time. "No. Thank you for waking me up." 3 months later, the Avery Foundation announced a nationwide grant. The ISA Jefferson Fellowship, providing full scholarships to young black girls pursuing careers in ethics, law, public service, and community leadership. The application prompt was simple. Tell us about a moment where you did the right thing, even when no one was watching. No one remembered Colson Drake anymore. He had become a cautionary tale in corporate ethics courses. A name attached to policy footnotes. A shadow erased by time and consequence. But people remembered ISA. They remembered Luana. They remembered what happened when a billion-dollar empire paused long enough to look at someone no one else saw. And they remembered how that changed everything. It was late. The building was quiet. The kind of quiet that only exists after everyone has gone home, after the lights dim, after the world exhales. Thomas Avery walked slowly through the marble hallway of Avery Tech's headquarters one last time. His cane tapped softly against the floor. He moved past the portraits of executives, most of them replaced now, and paused in front of a wall that hadn't been there a decade ago. It wasn't glass. It wasn't chrome. It wasn't a plaque carved in gold. It was a mural. Soft brushstrokes painted directly onto the concrete. It showed a young girl, no more than 7, kneeling beside a janitor cart, aligning stacks of money on the floor. Behind her, her mother stood tall, one hand on the mop, the other on her daughter's shoulder. Above them both, in elegant script, "Character is not revealed in boardrooms, but in broom closets." Dedicated to Luana and ISA Jefferson. And to all who do the right thing, even when no one is watching. Thomas touched the edge of the mural with his fingertips. Faint cracks in the paint. Imperfect. Real. He smiled. He turned to leave, but something caught his eye, just ahead. A young woman, maybe 19, was buffing the floor. Quiet, focused, humming to herself. She wore headphones and a company hoodie. And just like ISA, all those years ago, she moved like she belonged in a space no one had ever told her she could. She didn't notice him. And maybe that was the point. Thomas watched her work for a moment. Watched how the machine glided. Watched how the reflection came back, not from money, not from status, but from care. When she turned the corner, Thomas knelt down. Slowly, carefully, painfully, and with the sleeve of his coat, he wiped away a smudge she hadn't reached yet. Then stood, turned, and disappeared down the hallway. No cameras. No audience. No one watching. Just one last act of quiet integrity. On the cleanest floor he had ever walked.